A series decline as the seasons progress and as the years go by is nothing out of the ordinary, because certain actors get bored of a series, certain writers get bored of it, the enthusiasm that originally fueled them in season 1 probably isn't going to be there for season 5. Showrunners get changed, and showrunners are pretty much the guys who, like their title suggests, they run the show. They're the ones who create the creative decisions. They're the ones who pick what kind of direction they want for a particular season to go on. And as these all elements keep going on and on and on, a show does steadily decline in quality. Now, this is not a 100% ironclad rule, because there are shows such as Breaking Bad that manage to keep a consistent level of writing quality and of performances, of cinematography going from beginning to end, and in many cases vastly improve on them as the series progresses, creating a complete package where you can pretty much definitively say that there is no genuinely bad part of Breaking Bad, for example. However, Daredevil is really fucking weird, because you know how Arrow pretty much went from great in season 1 and like the first half of season 2 to kind of average and stupid in the second half of season 2, and then just outright stupidly retarded in season 3 to the point where anyone with a functioning brain just pretty much tuned out and stopped watching the show? Arrow took 3 seasons to get as bad as it did in season 3. That's like 3 years and 60-something episodes to do it. Daredevil manages to have such a decay in quality in the span of 1 season and 13 episodes. And it is so weird, because the first 4 episodes are easily some of my favorite Daredevil episodes that they've made thus far. In fact, I would argue that if they just released these first 4 episodes as like a film or like a mini-series instead of like a full-blown 13-episode season 2, I think a lot of people would genuinely love it and call it even better than season 1, because in those first 4 episodes, the writing is as tight as the whole season gets. The character stuff is interesting. The Punisher immediately sets a great presence for him. And by the end of the 4th episode, even though the ending is totally a ripoff of The Dark Knight, I mean, if you've seen The Dark Knight and you see episode 4, like the parallels between them are so blatantly obvious, like it's not even funny. But as episode 4's ending is such a conclusionary type ending, like they very easily just could have said, okay, we made 4 great episodes. This is like 4 great hours of entertainment. We had a beginning, a middle, and end. We had great action. We had great performances. We had great encounters, both verbal and combative, between Daredevil and the Punisher. And we've made something fucking great. Let's end it right here, and let's be proud of ourselves of what we've accomplished. That is the first 4 episodes. And I would even argue that Elektra's intro very easily could have been left as a post-credit stinger. Like, they could have just made this into like a 3-hour movie or something. They probably would have had more budget, to distribute it, to do some of the things they very obviously couldn't do in this show, and I'm going to get to that later on. But those first 4 episodes are so fucking good, man. They're such excellent quality. And then 5 episodes after those are just so average. They're not outright bad. I mean, there are certain bad scenes in them, but they're like 80% average, 10% bad, and then 10% brilliant. So while the overall score is kind of just meh on those episodes that are supposed to be the quote-unquote courtroom drama, I will admit that they did still have lots of shining moments in them, specifically the Punisher stuff. But then the last 3 episodes are Arrow Season 3 levels bad. I mean, the writers very clearly gave up by episode, I want to say 11 or 12. Those are basically, the last 3 episodes are basically the ones where they basically gave up. Characters just do shit for the sake of doing shit. There's no consistency in terms of what they're saying and what they're doing from beforehand. They're just doing stuff because the writers are clearly just writing these episodes scene to scene. There is no connective tissue. There is no consistency. The internal logic is completely fucked in the ass in those last 3 episodes. And even the Punisher stuff, which is almost completely great, gets a really nothing ending out of it. Like, the ending for the Punisher storyline just happens. and it's not satisfying at all. It's just like, wait, really? It's over? But we didn't resolve anything. You set this whole thing up about there might be being a thing here that kind of runs deeper, this another citywide conspiracy, and then you didn't do anything with it. It just ends, and then Frank shows up in the last episode to fight the Hand for no fucking reason, because the Punisher storyline is completely divorced from the Hand storyline. And this creates a situation where I feel like I'm watching two different shows. Like, on one hand, I got this sort of captivating investigation / revenge story with Punisher, going around killing the people he thinks are responsible for the deaths of his family, and Karen Page investigating into him. We get some really interesting insights into Frank Castle as a character, and I would probably say that this is the best version of the Punisher I've ever seen, because in the comics, Frank is pretty much a stoic murderer who has very little redeeming qualities about him. Here, Frank Castle is capable of being very stoic, very cold, like an efficient machine, but he's also capable of being angry, but he's also capable of just being a dude like you could meet in like a bar and just shoot the shit with. Like, he even gives some genuinely heartfelt relationship advice to Karen. And I would say that John Bernthal's Punisher is probably the most three-dimensional version of the character you're even going to get. Even his, antagonistic relationship with the Daredevil is really fun once these guys start getting some mutual respect for one another. And the show in the final episode tries to pass off like Punisher fighting the Hand as like this big moment of fuck yeah between them. But like I said, the writing in the last 3 episodes is so fucked that it makes no sense for Punisher to even be there. Their big moment of fuck yeah that the writers think they're writing doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. It's not earned, and it's Arrow season 3. It's the writers writing every scene as if it exists in its own separate dimension from the rest of the scenes and the rest of the show and the rest of the real world that we live in, and there's just nothing there. And most of the problems of season 2 come from the fact that the Hand storyline is both boring and really fucking stupid. I do not give a shit about the Hand in the comic books, and they could have made them interesting here. They really could have. And I would probably praise them for doing that, because like I just said not 5 seconds ago, I don't care about the Hand in the comic books. They're pretty much just an evil ninja clan that's there to resurrect characters, specifically Elektra, for when the writer needs them to be. They're good for mooks, but the focus of a whole season, at least like 80% of the season, nah, I wouldn't give them that. However, if the writers managed to do them in an interesting way, I probably would praise them for making me care about a whole organization of people from the comic books that I just don't give a shit about. But the Hand storyline is so fucking boring. I can't care about what they're doing here. And it really feels like the writers are being chicken shits in the second half of the season, because they do something with the Punisher that I found really, really interesting. I thought that once the Punisher got captured, I thought he was just going to be written out of the show and we were just going to be 100% invested, or at least forced into watching the Hand storyline. But that's not what they do. They set up this whole thing where Nelson Murdoch has to go protect the Punisher in court. They have to prove that he isn't just a malicious sociopath. There is a reason why this guy decided to murder dozens and dozens of criminals, and that he isn't just a evil sociopath like a lot of people think he is. And that stuff could have held a whole season in and out of itself. And it really feels like they just got fucking scared of the prospect of making 4 or 5 consecutive episodes where Daredevil might not even show up in costume. But I would argue that you don't need to do that, because Daredevil is one of those characters whose day-to-day life is interesting enough to make an entire show about. He is a lawyer. There are entire series, both comedic and dramatic, that are just about courtroom drama that are both fun and fascinating at the same time. And I feel like that with the proper writers involved, you could have very easily created 4 or 5 episodes of no Daredevil in his costume, just Matt Murdock doing the trial of the century, which is the people versus the Punisher. And if you executed that brilliantly, I don't think anyone would complain much about the fact that there isn't any Daredevil in costume. But if they really needed to have Daredevil in the costume, why not just introduce a bunch of Punisher villains? Why not just axe the whole stupid hand storyline and just introduce Punisher villains for Daredevil to tackle? Because this is a mild spoiler, but they already set up some kind of quasi-conspiracy concerning the deaths of Frank's family, and they basically invent pretty much a new antagonist, I think, for that whole season. And while I was watching that, I was just thinking to myself, wow, this whole conspiracy thing would work a lot better on both the Daredevil and Karen Page side if you just gave us Punisher villains. Make Punisher villains like fucking Jigsaw behind the conspiracy. That way you have this crazy supervillain type character for Daredevil to want to punch in the face, and for eventually for Frank to want to punch in the face. And then you can also have the more personal investigative element of Karen Page's storyline, delving into the psychology of Frank Castle and his background to figure out, is this guy just a man who was destroyed by one bad day in his life, or was he always just completely fucked in the head? And they don't do that. The whole trial of the century is basically a few scenes. They're not particularly great. They're not particularly interesting. They don't really go anywhere. You don't really feel like this is the trial of this century. Like, there's barely any moments where you're just feeling like the pressure is on for the good guys to win this trial. And that's a really good showcase of how piss poor the writing eventually progresses throughout the season. And ultimately, it feels like the hand storyline is just there for a bunch of action scenes, because for some reason they think that people just watch Daredevil for the action. Now, the action is good. It's not particularly memorable, it's not fantastic, but it's still good this season. However, that's not what people watched about Season 1, or at least not what they liked most about Season 1. It was all the crime stuff. It was how crime affects people. It was how people can fight against crime, and how crime can keep screwing up honest people just because it can. That was what was interesting. The character relationships were what were interesting beforehand. And here, Matt and Foggy's relationship is basically the same thing it was in the second half of Season 1. It's basically just them being angry and bitter at each other, fucking again, and questioning whether Nelson Murdoch can exist again. Then there's Karen and Matt, which is really not a good relationship, because Matt does not give a fuck about Karen throughout Season 1. And they really easily just could have been friends and just left it at there. Like, they did not need to strike up this whole romance. In fact, I would argue that Foggy and Karen would have been a cool relationship instead, because I think that the actors had genuine chemistry there. I think their banter was really fun. I really liked seeing them together, and it was just sort of nice to have this kind of situation where the main guy does not get the main girl, so to speak. And before you tell me, well, Ivan, der comics or der classics have Mad Bone Karen, so of course this show, which is accurate to der classics, must have that too. Well, please, sir, expert in comic books, please let me tell you to go fuck yourself, both respectfully and mostly disrespectfully, because in case you don't know, Pepper Potts from the Iron Man movies was not always Tony Stark's love interest. That was an invention of the fucking movie that they transferred over to the comic books. Pepper Potts was married to Happy Hogan, who you might know is Jon Favreau's character. She has only been Tony Stark's love interest for as long as Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man has existed. So please, tell me, good sir, why the fuck is it okay for the Iron Man movies to give Tony Pepper, who hasn't really been interested in him up until that point, but it would be sacrilege and blasphemy for them to change Karen's primary love interest from Matt to Foggy? No, fuck you. It's a retarded argument. And speaking of Karen, Karen has a major Lois Lane problem this season. You expect me to believe that this woman can solve two citywide conspiracies in the span of a year, but she cannot figure out that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. And before you tell me Matt Murdock is blind and it doesn't make sense that she would suspect him, fuck you again. Because this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, people. This is a universe where people are taught in history classes that a government-sanctioned super soldier with an invulnerable shield called Captain America fought laser-shooting super Nazis in the 1940s that were led by a guy with a red skull for a face who calls himself the Red fucking Skull. This is also a universe where Thor exists, the mythological god of Norse mythology. Thor exists. A dude, a giant green rage monster who's basically Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde exists in this universe. A dude with a fucking sci-fi suit that has like 50 different versions of itself exists. So with all this in mind, in the context of this larger, weird, cinematic and both TV universe, do you really expect me to believe that a blind guy knowing fucking kung fu is so ridiculous? Motherfucker, one of the driving things that allows the Kingpin in Season 1 to get much of a foothold in New York City is the fact that aliens opened a fucking portal in the middle of Manhattan and blew it the hell up. Karen just dismissing the possibility of Matt being Daredevil because he's blind is fucking retarded. And I was even giving the show some credit on this because there are some lines of dialogue where it like implies that Karen knows he's Daredevil, kind of like how Lois Lane knows that Clark Kent is Superman before he admits that he's Superman, but she's just not willing to, just say it to him. She wants to hear from him. And I was actually thinking they were going to go that direction, that there was just going to be a moment where Karen was going to take Matt to the side and tell him, look, I know you're Daredevil. I know being Daredevil is important for yourself and for the city, but right now it's hurting your relationships with your friends, and you need to fix it. I was giving the show that much credit because I trusted them based on Season 1 and the first 4 episodes of Season 2 that they were going to do something smart and clever as that. If there is one fucking thing Man of Steel did right, it is have Lois Lane immediately figure out that Clark Kent is Superman, because you cannot tell me that a woman who can discover 2 citywide conspiracies is incapable of figuring out that a dude who doesn't change his posture or voice in and out of costume is fucking Daredevil. And that also highlights a kind of problem with Cox's performance, where he doesn't really sell me as a blind guy. I'm going to get some flack for this, but I think Ben Affleck did a lot better job selling you that he was blind, and also a lot of the things in Ben Affleck's version also help you see why people would think he was blind, because Ben Affleck's Batman had all these notes around his house, saying, oh, this is the gray suit, this is the blue suit, this is where your water is, this is where the fridge is, this is where all this stuff is. And it was a lot of these small details that really helped you sell that Ben Affleck's Daredevil was a blind guy. And it also helps the fact that they actually gray out Ben Affleck's eyes, which further helps to sell the fact that he's blind. Charlie Cox does not alter his persona in and out of costume enough for me. Like, he has the same voice as lawyer Matt Murdock that he does in costume as Daredevil. And his posture doesn't particularly change. And every time I see him interacting with someone who knows both Daredevil and Matt Murdock, I just wonder to myself, how the fuck do you not figure out that this is Matt Murdock? Because he's not putting out any kind of different voice, he's not particularly hiding from you, he's not really making any sort of fucking effort to change his personality to throw people off. Like, say what you will about Bale Man or Nolan's Batman, but at least that guy acts completely different in and out of costume. Like, out of costume, he's a playboy, he's in a flirty with women, he's very showboaty, but in costume, he's always growling, he's always angry, and that really helps to sell the fact that these are two different people. And before you tell me that's just a Batman thing, if you've read Daredevil, Matt Murdock does not act in and out of costume the same way. Like, he very much acts like this different person in the comics, particularly the Brian Michael Bendis one, where every time I read this guy in costume, he always felt very angry, very vicious, like he was just one second away from just pouncing on you, bashing your fucking head in. And Charlie Cox's Daredevil does not have that, and this season really highlights a lot of the problems with his performance, and it just really stretches the whole believability of guys like Mahoney and Karen Page not figuring out that he is Daredevil. And then there's the ending, and the ending is so fucking stupid. If you have anything resembling critical thinking, you're immediately going to spot the whole plethora of stupidity involved in the ending. In fact, in the whole last 3 episode saga. And really, the show just gives up by episode 12. It just throws its hand up, and the writers just give up. They're like, fuck it, let's just make cool fan service shit happen for the sake of fan service. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to make any sort of internal logic. It doesn't have to have any sort of internal consistency. Let's just have shit happen because fuck it, we cannot be asked to care anymore. And that is pretty much how I felt by the end of the season. Through most of the second half, I was just like, fucking end already, please, or do something interesting so I can care about this show again. But then the last few episodes, they pretty much kicked me in the nuts. They infuriated me to Arrow's season 3 levels, and overall, the show is pretty fucked at the moment. Like, I'm not gonna give this a high rating. You guys know me. I'm a guy who says his opinion like it is. I don't like to sugarcoat anything just for the sake of getting more views or subscribers, because I legitimately do feel like this is a flawed as fuck season that has some of the stupidest TV writing I've seen since Arrow Season 3. Now, unlike Arrow Season 3, which pretty much destroys any chance the show could ever redeem itself, I still think that Daredevil has a shot of redeeming itself with the 3rd season. Because they set up the Kingpin coming back, and they set up something from the Brian Michael Bendis run, which I think is really, really interesting. And if they manage to pull that off and divorce it from the stupid fucking hand stuff, I think Daredevil Season 3 could be the season that redeems the show and brings it back to its former glory. But as it stands, the show, in the span of a single season, has gone through like a multiple year-long rut and decay in quality, and the worst thing that can happen is that they just completely Arrow Season 3 it, where Season 3 is basically just characters doing stupid shit all the time that doesn't make any sense, where the storylines make no sense, and no one cares anymore, including the actors. That's pretty much the worst case scenario. However, I think that the show has hit a big enough low that it can probably just go up from here on out. Now, whether this going up means it's just going to be painfully average, or it's just going to be good, or if it's going to be great again, that all depends on what the creative people behind the series do. But as it stands, I would say watch the first 4 episodes of Daredevil Season 2. It is the best Daredevil versus Punisher movie that you're ever going to get, really. And just skip the rest of the season. It's not worth it. The courtroom stuff with the Punisher, while good, ultimately leads to a nothing ending that pretty much ruins even that good storyline. The Hand and Elektra stuff is fucking boring. And then once they start talking about the Black Sky, you're pretty much going to want to kill yourself if you have anything resembling taste or critical thinking. So yeah, Daredevil Season 2, it's mostly a dud. Watch the first 4 episodes. Those are fantastic. I would highly recommend those to any comic book fan, especially of the Daredevil and Punisher characters, and especially of that whole dynamic between those characters. But unless you're like a super big hardcore fan of the Hand, fucking avoid everything past Season 4 like the plague. Just trust me, it's not worth it.